Masechet Sotah Daf Mem Bet. This is a new perek, but we're continuing the same theme as the previous perek, the same list from the beginning of the previous perek, which was all things that one must say in Hebrew. And actually, this theme is going to continue all the way until the very end of the Masechet. So now we're up to Meshuach Milchama B'Shash Medaber El Ha'am B'Lashon HaKodesh Medaber Shneimar V'Hayav Karobchem Ela Milchama V'Nigash HaKohen Ze Kohen Mashuach Milchama V'Diber El Ha'am B'Lashon HaKodesh. We're talking about a Kohen who is anointed for the purpose of war. He would go and speak to the troops and rally them. And at the time when he would speak to the nation, he would have to speak in Hebrew, as the pasuk says, when you enter into war, this Kohen will come close. And so this Kohen is referring to the one anointed specifically for this job, to speak to the troops, and he will speak to them v'diber b'lashon hakodesh. I will explain that the word v'diber, we make a gezerah shava that has to be in Hebrew. What does he say? So we could refer to the Pisukim now, so that we can see the context. Right? It says here, when you go out to war, and you see, right, even a lot of horses and chariots, forces that are larger than you, lo tira mehem, don't worry, because Hashem will be with you. He took you out of Egypt. And when you join battle, right here you go, the Kohen will address the troops, and here's what he says: Lehem Shema Yisrael, Atem kerabim hayom lemilchama lo bechem, al yarech el yadach lebabchem, va'al tireu, va'al tachpezu, va'al tarsu mipenehem. We're going to learn a lot from each of these words. Shema Yisrael is going to refer back to Shema, as we know, Hashem Elokeinu. You are entering into war today against your enemies. Having a war against enemies is different than having a civil war, as we'll see. And do not let your courage not falter. Do not be in fear, panic, and dread of them. Ki Adonai Lochem haolechem lachem leilachem lachem im oibechem leoshiatchem, because Hashem will be with you. And then the next section we have the shotrim, the other officials, the judges will come, not judges, officials will come to the people and say, whoever has a milestone in their life, if they built a new house and has not yet lived in it, or if they planted a vineyard but have not yet harvested or got married, engaged but have not yet completed the marriage, they should go home. And then the shotrim add and say, anyone who is afraid, let them go back so they don't ruin the mood for everybody else and make their courage be depleted. And then, that's it. And then it has a list of laws about war. All right, so those are the Pisukim. We're going to see how the Mishnah interprets it. Al oibechem velo al achechem. Right, you're going into war today against your enemies, not with your brothers. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are also civil wars with one's brothers. Lo Yehuda al Shimon velo Shimon al Binyamin shim tipelu beyadam yirachamu alechem. It's not the same as when you have Yehuda fighting against Shimon and Shimon fighting against Binyamin. Throughout history, there were civil wars between the northern and southern kingdoms with Binyamin and others. So, because when you go into war with your own brethren, if you fall captive, they will have mercy on you. Whereas when you come to a foreign enemy, there will be no mercy. Take no captives. And we actually have a story. It's mentioned in here in Divrei Yamim. In fact, there was a story of a civil war between the north and the south, and the north beat Yehuda and took some 200,000 captives, and the people in the north were going to keep them as slaves. But then the Navi came to them and said, it's bad enough that you had a civil war, but now you're going to take your own brethren, other members of Bnei Israel from another shevet, and enslave them. That is not the right thing to do. And the people said, you're right. And instead, those people, right, that realized that, that were mentioned, they took those captives, and all that had been naked, they gave them clothing, and they gave them food and drink, anointed them, meaning to soften their skin so that they could be healthy, and they carried the ones that couldn't walk on donkeys, and they brought them to Yericho. In other words, they took good care of their captives and returned them to where they wanted to go. And so that's true in a civil war. But in a foreign war, this that's not going to be the case. Okay, so you need to know that. Now, you're going with your enemies, then, and if you fall captive to them, they will not have mercy on you. Nevertheless, do not be faint of heart. Do not be alarmed. Do not be terrified. What are all these phrases? Enemy armies would often make a lot of noise and do things to stir up their courage and to put fear in the hearts of the enemy. And so let your heart not be faint when you hear the neighing of the horses and the sharpening of the enemy's sword, and your heart's going to start beating out of fear, right? Don't worry. Al tireu, be not fearful. Don't worry about that when you hear the knocking of shields and the noise of boots. These are boots. Here you can see maybe example boots from Roman times that are called Caligula, which happens to be also the name of one of the most evil emperors that we mentioned just yesterday. Caligula, there he means little boots because apparently they dressed him in little boots when he was a kid. I wonder if it comes from the same word as clogs. Okay, anyway, this is when you hear those boots coming, you know lots of soldiers are coming, and that is scary. But don't be afraid. Al tachbezu mikol keranot. Don't be afraid by the trumpets. And here's a karon, trumpet that Romans would use to announce the war and get the other people scared. Al tarasu mipnei kol sevachot, and the shouts, right? The soldiers would all shout. So that's why it says all of these words that don't be. Don't lose your courage from all these tactics, noises that the enemy will use. Ki Adonai Elohechem haolech imachem. Hem ba'im b'nischono shel basar v'adam v'atem ba'im b'nischono shel makom. They're coming, championed by just mere flesh and blood, their king, their emperor. But you are coming with championed by Hamakom, by the omnipresent. Pilishtim ba'u b'nischono shel Goliat. Here's from some examples. Pilishtim, their champion was Goliat. What happened to him? He was killed. His whole nation was killed. Bnei Ammon ba'u b'nischono shel Shobach. Also in time of David, Ammon came and they were championed by Shovach, their general. And what was the end? He fell by sword, and they all fell by sword. So they're all flesh and blood, and no matter how big or scary they seem, we have Hashem on our side. Vatem, iatem ken, ki Adonai Elohechem haolech imachem nilachem nachem egomer ze machane ha'aron. Hashem will be with you to fight with you against your enemies. In what way is Hashem with us? With the Aron that is taken out for war. It represents Hashem's providence and power that is with them during the battle. Good. That's the Mishnah. Mai ka'amar. Now it says, when it says there has to be in Hebrew because his word vidiber. Well, how do you know that means that the Kohen Mashuach has to speak in Hebrew? The Mashuach Milchama. Kachi ka'amar shenemar vidiber. Olan omer Moshe daber v'halim yanenu bekol ma lalan b'lshon hakodesh afkan b'lshon hakodesh. We saw this pasuk before. So here it says Dibed, and when Moshe was speaking in Har Sinai, it also says Yedaber, and over there we already proved that was in Hebrew. We made Gezra Shava to this pasuk from the word Kol and Kol. Here we're doing it from Yedaber and Diber, and so that's how we know that this Kohen has to speak in Hebrew. תנו רבנן, וניגש הכהן ודיבר אל העם. יכול כל כהן שירצה, Baraita is going to elaborate and ask, well, the pasuk just says, the kohen will come and speak to them. So maybe any kohen can do it. Talmud Omar, v'diberu hashotrim b'mimuneh, af hakohen b'mimuneh. No, but then it says that the officers, these officials, so these officials are appointed precisely for this job. And so too, just like the officials who are going to say those exempt should go home, they have to be appointed. So too, it's going to be a kohen who's specially appointed for this job to be in charge of the war. Ve'ema kohen gadol. Maybe it's the kohen means kohen gadol. He's appointed. He's appointed for lots of things. Dumiyad shoter. Ma shoter sheyesh memuneh al gabav. Af kohen sheyesh memuneh al gabav. It has to be similar to the officer. Just like the officer is a lower officer, there's a higher officer above them. There's going to be a general or a judge that's going to be above this officer. So too, the Kohen has to be someone who's not the highest Kohen Gadol, but has to be someone who's appointed, who has also a boss over him. We ask, Kohen Gadol namehaika melech al gabav. The Kohen Gadol does have a boss. He has a king. Remember, we saw yesterday that the Kohen Gadol takes the Sefer Torah and gives it to the king. King is higher than the Kohen Gadol. And the answer is, we mean within that function, within that work. Kohen, there's nobody within the kehuna that's higher than the Kohen Gadol. Yes, Kohen Gadol would have to answer to a melech, so it's his boss, but not a boss within the service of the Kohanim. So the Kohen Gadol is the highest. Has to be someone that would be a deputy under the Kohen Gadol. So ve'ema segan. So say it's the deputy. The deputy, his job is that in case the Kohen Gadol becomes tameh, incapacitated, or dies, so we need a vice Kohen to step in. So he's a second, and he's a second in command, and he is in the service of Kehuna. So why can't he be the one to go out to war? Segan labim munehu detanya marbi chanina. Segan kohanim lemas segan memune shimerabo pesu bekon gadol nichnas meshamesh tachtav. The answer is no. He is actually not appointed for any job. The vice, just like the vice president, is the most boring job. Every vice president hates his job. He sits around and does nothing. He just waits to see, the off chance that the president will get sick or die. So that's so too. The vice Kohen Gadol, he actually has no appointment to do any function, because as we says in the Braita here, for what is the vice Kohen Gadol chosen? So that if the Kohen Gadol becomes pasul, then he can come instead. But since he has no profile and no official position, therefore it's not called memuneh, and that would not be like the officers who are appointed for a specific task. And that's why that's how we learn that it has to be a different Kohen who is appointed under the Kohen Gadol for the specific task of being with the nation as they go out to war. V'amar alehem Shema Yisrael. And now in the speech, as we just saw in the Pesukim, he starts off saying, getting everybody's attention. Listen, Israel. In the Peshat, it just means he's getting their attention. There's a lot of times when we say Shema Yisrael. My Shema Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Afilu lo kiyamtem ela kiryat Shema shacharit v'arbit, yihatem nimsarim biyadam. But there's a midrash that's going to connect this Shema Yisrael with the famous Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai teaches that Hashem tells Bnei Israel, even if you fulfill only saying Kiryat Shema in the morning and at night, then that will be sufficient merit that you will not be delivered into the hands of the enemies, right? You don't, better to do more and to learn more Torah and do more good deeds and all that, but even just that basic pledge of allegiance, just do that at least, and then Hashem will make sure that you're not harmed. Al yarach lebabchem al tidu. The Kohen continues and says, do not be faint of heart, do not be alarmed. Tenu Rabbanan, pa'amay medaber imam, achat basefar v'achat b'milchama. Basefar mahu omer. This Braita teaches that it's against the Peshat, but I'll explain. That the Kohen actually speaks to them on two different occasions. Once on the border before they go in, and once again on the battlefield. So at the border, what does he say? Listen to my words. Here's the regulations of the war, right? Regulations that might include all the laws of the ethics of war, right? Who can you kill? Who can you not kill? The continuation of the Devarim Perek Chaf is all about that. But it may very well include also, and she does say that it includes includes the exemptions from war. Now, this is curious because the exemptions, as we just saw, were actually said by the Shotrim, right? Anyone in those three categories or who's afraid should go home. We're going to see the Gemara on the Daf tomorrow is going to say that actually both the Kohen, Mashuach Milchama, and the Shotrim talk about the exemptions, the Kohen first, and then the Shotrim afterwards. So this Baraita is following that opinion, that the Kohen is also first. It's out of order because that means the exemptions are first, which makes sense. That first you want to say the exemptions. You're at the border. Listen, anyone who's not fit here or has a milestone, go home. So they're still going to go home and not go all the way to the battlefield. After the Kohen and the Shotrim do that, then chizru, right here it says chizru, and go back home. So that's how you see from this word that it is talking about exemptions. The chizru b'milchama mahu omed, and then the Kohen will speak again at the battlefield, and there he will say what comes first in the parasha, Ad yarach lebavchem al tirvatach bezu al tarsu keneged arba devarim shomot ha'olam osin magifin meri'in sovchin veromsin. And it says 4 different statements of not being afraid, corresponding to the 4 things that the armies of the nations of the world do. They clash their weapons, they blast their horns, they shout, and they trample with their shoes with their boots to find the enemy. Don't be afraid of any of that. Good. Now the Mishnah gave some examples. Pelishtim ba'u b'nischono shel Goliat. How the Bnei Israel, we have Hashem on our side, and they have only a human being on their side. For example, the Pilishtim, they came championed by Goliat. Let's talk about a lot of Agadah about Goliat. Goliat Amar Yochanan Shamad Begilui Panim Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's called Goliat not because his not just that happens to be his name, but his name comes from Galui, Gilui. He was brazen-faced before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shenemar Beru Lachem Ish Ve'yered Elai Ve'nish Ela Kadosh Baruch Hu. Goliath was made a threat. And said, right, hey, you guys, choose a man, choose your best fighter, and let him come down to me. He's taunting them. And the Midrash says, Ish refers to none other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu shenemar, Adonai Ish Milchama. So Goliath was actually referring, and according to this Midrash, was saying, bring your God and let him come here, and I will fight him. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Areni mapilo al yad ben Ish shenemar v'David ben Ish Efrati hazen. Hashem says, I'm not going to deal with him directly. I'm going to get a child, a Ben Ish. And that refers to David. David is referred to here as Ben Ish Efrati. Why Ben Ish? Because he was still young and says, I don't need to deal with you. You're just a human being, and I'll even kill you by this small child. Regarding Goliath, his mouth trapped him on 3 occasions. He was saying some kind of threat, but within the words of the threat, he actually predicted his own downfall. One that we just mentioned, he said, choose a person among you and let him come down to me. So let him come down is already indicating that guy, David, is higher and Goliath is lower. Goliath is going to fall. And then he says, if he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we'll be your servants. But if I prevail and kill him, then you shall be our servants. You see that first he says, if he's able to fight with me and kill me. So he starts off, hey, if you can kill me, right, which already foreshadows that in fact is going to happen, what he said first. And the next time it says, am I a dog that you come to me with staves? And so he's saying, yes, indeed, he is going to die like a dog. So Goliath again predicted his own downfall. David name amar le. But now we ask, David also said something that sounds like it's negative. David said, Ata ba elai becherev ubechanit ubechidon. David said, you're coming against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. And that sounds like, yeah, he's coming against him, and he's predicting that Goliat will win? No, the answer is Hadad Amar Lev Anochi Ba'alecha B'Shem Adonai Sebaot Elohei Yisrael Marchot Elohim Marchot Yisrael Asher Hayrafta. David answered, I'm coming. David added immediately after that, I'm coming to you in the name of Hashem, in charge of all the armies and the hosts of heaven and the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. So because David followed up immediately, contrasting your measly sword with what I have, my secret weapon, right? Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu on our side. So that's why David's statement was positive, whereas, and he only mentioned the cherif to contrast it with Hashem, so that was not setting up for foreshadowing his own downfall, whereas Goliath's three statements were all negative. ויגש הפלישתי וישכם והערב אמר רבי יוחנן כדי לבטלן מקריאת שמע שחרית וערבית. Continuing on that Shema theme, it says that this Pilishti Goliath, he would come every morning and every evening and taunt them for 40 days. Why did he come every morning and every evening? So, following up on Shema, in order that they would prevent them from reciting Shema. Right in the morning, during Shema time, he'd be yelling and screaming and everybody be distracted, and hopefully they won't say Shema. We just said, if they say Shema every morning and evening, then they'll be protected. So Goliath, knew this, and he's gonna distract them during a time of Shema. 40 יום, אמר רבי יוחנן, כנגד 40 יום, שניתנה בהן תורה. And he was presenting himself there and taunting them for 40 days. Why 40 days? Corresponding to the 40 days during which the Torah was given. Meaning that he hoped through his taunts and destruction of Bnei Israel, that way he would destroy the Torah as well. That's what he was trying to do. Okay, we continue with Goliath. It calls Goliath a person of Benayim. Literally means he's standing between the two camps. He's at the forefront of the Pilishtim, and that's why he's championing them, and he's in between. But when Midrash reads it differently, my benayim amarav shemivune mikol mum. Several interpretations. One is that he is built and free of any blemish. Shmuel amar benoni shebechav. He's the middle among his brothers. I mean, he was just so-so. He was not the middle child. Deber bishela amar shehu asui kebinyan. That he was as tall and big as a building. Rabbi Yochanan amar bar me'a papi v'hada nanai. He says Benayim means that he had 100 fathers and one dog as a father. So papi from pop, Greek, and nani means dog, but it's curious why it means dog. Some say that the nun really should have been a chaf, chani, like canine. Anyway, his mother was, let's say, loose, and so he may have been born of any number of 101 fathers. Goliath shemo migat. Now his name was Goliath, and he comes from a place. There's a city called Gat. We know where that city is, but we're going to read it midrashically, as symbolically. Taner of Yosef, Shakol Dashin et Imo Kegat. She's called that because Gat means a threshing floor. Everybody would thresh upon, meaning sleep with his mother, like people step on grains or a wine press. Gat means a wine press, rather. So everybody would step on her and abuse her. Ketiv me'arot v'karenan ma'archot Taner of Yosef shakol ha'aru be'imo. It also says that Goliath came from the caves me'arot, but we read ma'archot, meaning from the ranks, from the field of the soldiers. And so why is it written ma'archot? From he'ara, meaning everyone penetrated and everyone had their way with her. Ketiv hadafa uchtiv Orpah. Okay, so now this is interesting. We're taking hadafa. This is in Shemuel Bet 21. It mentions other battles. And so they fought other Pilishtim at other times. And then it names this Yishbi Benov Asher Bilideh Hadafa. So someone who is a descendant of this person, Hadafa. The Midrash is going to equate Hadafa here with Orpah from Ruth. Just like Orpah, she left her mother-in-law contrasting with Ruth, who was loyal to Naomi. So she's a negative character, and this negative character gave birth to several enemies of Israel that are detailed in the following Pesukim here, right? Bichi, Chushti, Saf, all the children of this Hadafa. Okay, so we're going to combine these two and say Hadafa is also the mother of Goliat. So putting these two different contexts of fights with big enemy giant Pelishtim together with Goliat, and so reading it together. So here we have this Hadafa, Ketiv Orpah. So here in one place says Hadafa, one place says Orpah. So assuming it's the same person, which one was her real name and which one was a nickname? Really, her name was Hadafa, but everyone called her Orpah. Orif, like Egla Arufa, means the back of the neck. Orpah was probably called that because she turned her neck back against Naomi and left her. But here we're interpreting it back, meaning backside, that everybody would have their way with the mother of Goliat, and that's why from the back, Orpah. The other opinion says that Orpah was her real name and her nickname was Hadafa. Hadafa comes from means the word groats, which means grains, a part of grain the kernels of the grain. So why is she called grains, groats? Because everybody threshes upon her, uses her, abuses her, like people step on groats on the threshing floor. And how do we see that Hadifot means groats? When David was running away, one woman hid him by having him go into a well, and she put a cover over the well, and she put this grains on top of it, so they would not notice. So we see from that context that it means these grains. Or a different pasuk, though you should crush a fool in a mortar with a pestle among the groats, yet his foolishness will not depart from him. Good. Another pasuk there from that context, that Hadafa had 4 children, and they all fell by the hand of David. Who are they? Amar Rav Yosef, Saf uMadon, Goliat, Vishbi, Benov. These are their names. You can look at the Pesukim there, where they are mentioned. Vayipelu b'yad David b'yad avadav. Dichtiv, Vatishak Orpah lachamota veRut dabka baha. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yabo b'nei haneshuka, v'yipelu b'yad b'nei hadevuka. So now we're reading the story of David and Goliat and the other Pelishtim back into there's a foreshadowing of it from the ancestor of David, who is Ruth, and the ancestor of Goliat and the Pelishtim, who is Orpah / Hadafa. So Orpah, she kissed her mother-in-law and said goodbye. She was sad to leave. She did the normal thing that she had no husband, no future, and so she went back to her people. But Ruth, she stuck to her mother-in-law and took care of her and came, and that's why she's the heroine of the story. So the Barak explains that Hashem said, because of what they did, the one who was kissed, meaning Orpah, that she will fall. That the children of the one who kissed will fall by the ones who cleaved. In other words, the descendants of Orpah, Goliat, and all of that family will fall by the hands of the one who cleaved, referring to David, the grandson of Ruth, who cleaved to Naomi. And here at Theme we see often that even a Rasha who does a little good thing gets rewarded for that small good thing that they do. And here, because Orpah cried 4 tears, we see this from the fact that she seemed to be sad to leave Naomi, and so she cried 4 tears over having to leave her mother-in-law. So she merited from that good deed that she had 4 giants that would eventually come from her, and these giants are Goliat and these others that came and persecuted Israel, and that's why it says they lifted their voice and wept again. So it says here that they cried. So this crying is the cause of the good deed of crying, that she at least felt bad that she left her mother-in-law, caused the benefit to them, which was an adversary to us. Ketiv Hayetz Hanito, V'karenan Ayetz Hanito. Back to the main part of section of Goliat, where it says that he had a spear. There's a kriyuchtiv here. It's written chetz, half of chetz from chetzi, half of a spear. But we read it ayetz, that he had a wooden spear. So what is that? Amar bi Elazar, adayin lo higa'nu lechasi shibcho shelo torasha. Mikan she'asur lesaper b'shibchan shel reshaim vela liftach bekelal leodu'eh shibche de David. Elazar says that the description, it describes how big his spear is. It was like a weaver's beam, and so that's the main description. Ayetz, the Ketiv is saying that description is actually only description of half of the size of his spear. So this is only half of the praise of how strong the Goliath was. And so we learn from here that you should not praise a full, one should not praise a Rasha. It's not nice to say, you shouldn't say some, evil, Putin. Oh, Putin is very smart. He has a lot of weapons. He can do this, right? Don't give praise to evil people. So now we ask, if you shouldn't praise evil people, then why mention anything at all? Don't even talk about half of the size of his spear. And the answer is, we want to praise David. We want to show how great David is, and look how David was able to conquer Goliath, even though Goliath was this strong. But when we describe Goliath's strength, we don't give full praise to Goliath. We just give an inkling of it, not for the purpose of giving praise to the Rasha, but for the purpose of praising David. Okay, the Mishnah continues and mentions a different battle against Ammon, and their commander was Shovach. And see, that was just flesh and blood, and that's why Bnei Israel, David, was able to conquer them easily, because they had Hashem on their side. Okay, Ketiv Shovach Uchtiv Shofach. In Shemuel, it says his name was Shovach, but in the parallel in Divrei Yamim, it says his name was Shofach. Bet and Peh are often interchanged because they're both bilabials. They said with the two lips, B and P, and so a lot of times they do interchange, so you could understand how such a thing could happen. But the Gemara wants to explain both of them. So Rav Ushmael Chadamar Shofach Shemo, v'lama nikra Shemo Shovach, she'asui ke Shovach. So one, either Rav Shmuel, I'm not sure which one is which, says that his name actually was Shofach, but his nickname was Shovach because he was like a Shovach means a dovecote, a nest that's all the way up high in a tree. This Shovach was so tall, he was as tall as a dovecote in a tree. That's how scary he was. Lefanav Ketikon. Others say his name was actually Shovach. His nickname was Shofach because anyone who would see him, his courage would spill out like lishpoch, like a jug, and he just loses all of his strength. Ashpato kekeber patuach kolam giborim. Now, a different topic, the description of the enemy force of Nebuchadnezzar. Yirmiyah says their quiver, where you hold the bows, is an open sepulcher. They are all mighty men. What does that mean? Rav Ushmael Amvamri la Rav Rabbi Amev Rabbi Aseh Hadamar Beshash Zorkin Chetz Osin Ashpatot Shel Halalim. So this ashpato, which literally means quiver, it could also mean heaps. When they shoot an arrow, they kill so many people that they make heaps of corpses. And maybe you'll say, okay, they're particularly skilled at bow and arrow, but maybe they're not so strong. Talmud Omar, kulam giborim. No, they're also really mighty men in all ways. V'chad amar b'shah she'osin sorchehen osin ashpatot shel zebel. Or another opinion, the ashpatot, the piles, refers not to pile of corpses, but rather when they go to the bathroom, they make piles and piles of excrement. Now, is that a good sign? Maybe it means that they have a stomach ache and they are sick. Talmud Omar kulam giborim. That's why it follows up and says giborim, they are in fact strong, and this is a sign of how much they eat, and they're mighty men that look how they go to the bathroom. Amar Rav Mari Shema minahai mad nafish zible holi me'ayim hu lemay nafkamina litrach benafshe. So he says, we can learn something important, some practical lesson here, that a person who is going to the bathroom a lot, it means he's sick. I mean, unless he is one of these giant mighty men who eat so much, but otherwise the assumption is that there's something wrong, and so why would you want to know that? Well, get yourself to a doctor to figure out how to get better. And now that once we're thinking about people who are sick and that they should do something to get better, here's some more advice. Daga belev ish Yashchena. Pasuk in Mishle, if there's a worry in a person's heart, he should, what does that mean, Yashchena? Rabbi Amar Rabbi Aseh, Hadamar Yaschena midato, V'Hadamar Yesichena la'acherim. Either take it away, remove it from your mind, right? Don't think about it anymore. Don't worry, be happy. And the other opinion says you should tell it over to others, right? Don't just forget about it. Don't keep it bottled up, but rather relate it to others. And by talking about it, that will relieve your anxiety. Okay, I guess two different approaches to psychology, right? To bottle it up and suppress it, or go talk to someone. The second one probably works better. V'atem atem ken. Now back to the Mishnah, the Kohen Mashuach Melchama would say, you Bnei Israel don't have to worry, because your champion is not flesh and blood, but rather Hamakom. V'kol kach lama mipnei she'Hashem v'chol kinuyav munachim ba'aron. Why is he making such a big deal out of this? Because the name of Hashem and all of its appellations are written in the Aron, where they have the Luchot, and so they're taking the Aron out with them, and that's the representation of God's presence among them. וכן הוא אומר, וישלח אותם משה 1,000 למטה לסבא, אותם ואת פנחס. And we see this similarly regarding the war. When they fought Midian, Moshe got 1,000 men from each of the tribes, and he sent with them Pinchas, them and Pinchas. So now Otam, what does it mean? Who does Otam add? Elu Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin, they had to okay the war, and maybe they're the Shotrim that are going and speaking to the people. Pinchas, ze Mashur Melchama. Pinchas was the Mashur Melchama in that war. It's very nice. We're taking the laws from Devarim and we're applying and looking for, did Moshe follow these laws? Well, he went out to war with Midian, and here you go. You see that he's actually following exactly this protocol. He sent the holy vessels, that's the Aron, and the Luchot, those are the holy vessels that you send to war. And the trumpets, these are the shofarot that he also sent to, announce, just like the enemy we saw before, they play those big trumpets, and so we also have our trumpets that call upon Hashem in a time of distress as part of prayer. Tana, lo lechinam malach Pinchas lemelchama ela liparadin avi imo. Now Pinchas, why did he go? He's a Kohen, he's the Kohen Gadol. Why specifically him? Why didn't they choose a different Kohen? Oh, it's not for nothing that Pinchas went. He went to avenge the wrong of his mother's father, who was Yosef. Now, I know you're going to say Pinchas is a Kohen. His father comes from Aharon, from Levi. Yeah, but we're talking about his mother's side. On his mother's side, he is from Yosef. Shneimar, v'amedanim achru oto el Mitzrayim. Says that regarding Yosef, that Medanim, same as Midyanim, sold Yosef, and to get them back, Pinchas, the descendant of Yosef, wanted to go and fight the Midyanim. He had a personal stake in it. Now, wait, what is his mother from Yosef? It says in this midrash, pasuk, that Elazar, the son of Aharon, married one of the daughters of Putiel and bore Pinchas, is the rest of this pasuk. Now, and there's a tradition that this Putiel, who is Putiel? The midrash always likes to connect someone we don't know with someone who we do know, and it says Putiel is Yitro. He's called Putiel because he would fatten up calves so that he could worship Avodah Zarah. He was an Avodah Zarah guy until he came around. And so you see that, no, Pinchas's mother's side comes from Yitro. So we answer no. Mi Yosef shepitpet b'Yisra. No, this Putiel is referring to Yosef. Why is he called Putiel? Because he mocked his desire. He was able to resist the advances of Paro's wife, and that's why pitpet. So now, who is it referring to? Hold on, we have a longer midrash that it must have been from that Pinchas is in fact from Yitro, because in that story, the tribes would denigrate Pinchas is after he killed Zimri, and they said, "Ritem ben putize ben shepitem abi imo galim labodah zarah yareg nasim Israel." Who came and killed Zimri, a patriarch in Israel? Who was that? Who did that? This Puti, this person who is a descendant of Yitro, his mother's father is Yitro, who fattened avodah zarah. This guy, what right does he have to go and kill one of the princes among us? So you see from that elaboration of the story that he must have been from Yitro, not from Yosef. אלא אי עבוד עמם יוסף עמד עמם יתרו ועמד עמד מיוסף עבוד עמם יתרו. תקנמד דכתיב מבנות פותיאל תראה משמע שמע מינה. And we answer that both of these lineages are correct. One way or another, it doesn't really matter. Either his mother's father was from Yosef, then his mother's from Yitro. Or if his mother was from Yosef, then his mother's father was from Yitro. But in fact, it says Mibenot Putiel, that he is a descendant on his mother's side from two Putiels. One Putiel, that's Yitro, who fattened calves for Avodah Zarah, and the other Putiel, Yosef, who was Pipet B'Yitzro, and that's why Moshe chose Pinchas specifically to be the Kohen Mashur Melchama, to go out to war, to take a hand in avenging the Midyanim who sold Yosef. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.